Diana has another. Oh, okay. Diana has another little quick poll, just so we can wake up a little bit before we segue over into talking about lawns and irrigation. And uh, this is the same thing, Mentimeter. You can go to that link in the chat, and you can type in some things. These are some things that have been typed in already. Um, Question, repeat the name of the place for buying compost. The place I was mentioning is Commonwealth Urban Farms, and you can do a quick Google search of their name and you can find their contact information, Commonwealth Urban Farms. And Lily, I'm not sure if you're on, but if you wanted to put any information in the chat bar, Lily is a master composter and reminded me that they have compost. And so I'm sure she would be glad to either private message you or to share some information. So as we get started, in the chat bar, there's some words that come to mind when you think about what are your biggest spring lawn challenges. I see ice melt. That's a reality that we're dealing with today for sure. Um, Weeds, always a big one. Um, Stickers, erosion, dead spots, mowing, weather, moles, lack of rain. We'll be talking about a lot of these things today. Henbit. We will be talking about a lot of these things today as we get in. So look forward to chatting with you about that. I will say this ice has definitely been, we do get some small amounts of winter weather this time of year um, historically, but man, this will be interesting to see what comes from this with our lawns, what kind of winter damage we might get on our Bermuda grass, how effective the pre-emergent applications and weed control applications that were applied, say 2-3 weeks ago, are going to be, because as we get an abundance of moisture, pushing that down into the soil as that melting ice and snow starts to infiltrate, we'll probably find that a lot of those applications of weed control products that were done before this weather are going to be pretty ineffective or less effective than they might have been normally. So I'm going to jump right in and get started. Feel free, as we've done with Julia, to put some questions in the chat, and Diana can stop me at any time if there's questions that need to be addressed. But in general, just remember that when we talk about lawns, there are cool season lawn types and there are warm season lawn types. So cool season lawn types will be things like tall fescue, um, ryegrasses, and then warm season grasses will be your Bermuda grass, which is most common here in Oklahoma, as well as things like zoysia and buffalo grass. And what you'll notice about these two images is that there are two distinct growing seasons for cool season grasses, and there's kind of one peak growing season for warm season grasses. And so that is why we have some fall establishment opportunities. I'm sorry, some spring establishment opportunities for cool season, as well as some fall establishment opportunities for cool season grasses. Whereas warm season grasses, really, we're talking late spring through the summer and the end of summer, early fall is really when we're thinking about the management. And as we dive in today, we'll look at both cool and warm season grasses. Let's start with Bermuda grass, though. This is a screen grab from one of our fact sheets. It's called the Bermuda Grass Lawn Management Calendar. If you go to that fact sheet website, which we referred to earlier, and I'll also mention again by the time I'm done today, you will be able to search for this and find it. And it goes month by month. So I love it because it breaks the months of the year down and gives you a calendar of the maintenance practices that need to be going on with Bermuda grass. So everything from establishing, dethatching, mowing, fertilization, watering, weed control, all of those things are listed here and indicated when they're going to be taking place. So you'll see here that some pre-emergent weed control happens in the month of January all the way through into April and early May. And typically it's broken up into two, sometimes three, but generally two key treatments in the spring and summer, and then a fall treatment, depending on what types of weeds you're trying to control. Um, and so we will dive into all that today, but this is a great resource. This is just an image of the calendar portion, but actually when you get this fact sheet, you'll see it'll list out the pre-emergent, and then on the back side it'll actually tell you what products to use, timing, all of those things. So it's really, really helpful, quick reference. But some of the things that you'll be thinking about when it comes to early spring warm season lawn care are things like dethatching. Um, so dethatching can happen all the way through mid-February, all the way into April if needed. Um, it's definitely something that if you have a regular fertilizer program on your lawn, you have a company come out and fertilize a few times a year, that at least every 2 to 3 years, you may want to consider having this done. Over time, as you put fertilization down on your lawns, it grows, and then that bottom layer of material that is underneath starts to decay, die back, and creates a layer of thatch over your yard, which over time can reduce the ability of moisture and nutrients to flow through. It can restrict oxygen around the soil surface and can cause some issues. And so it's something you want to clean up every few years. It can be done as simply as heavy raking over the grass in the spring before heavy green up, or you can hire it out and have a professional dethatching service provide. Aerification is different than dethatching. It is actually um, not tillage, but it's creating basically some punctures in the soil, which are going to provide more airspace for roots to grow in, and also um, potentially for applying a organic material such as compost or sand or something of that nature in heavy compacted soils where your soils are just really hard, really compacted. If you aerify, you can kind of loosen that soil back up, kind of fluff it back up, make it more spongy by poking those holes in, and then applying some compost. And it's a great practice, again, every few years, especially in areas where there's a lot of heavy foot traffic, areas where there's compaction, soils such as heavy clay soils, fine textured soils that are just naturally really hard, are great places to think about doing that every so often. Fertilization is an ongoing thing. Unfortunately, you can improve the health of your soil and reduce the need for fertilization, for irrigation, all of those things. But fertilization in the form of nitrogen, if we want green lawns throughout the growing season, is something that we will have to think about from time to time, no matter what our soil conditions. And the reason for that is that nitrogen is a mobile nutrient. And so it only stays in the root zone for so long before it moves off in the form of runoff or down into to depths of the soil. And so when I think about fertilization, which we will get into a lot, but think about nitrogen as gas in your car, and think about other nutrients as like your fluids, your windshield wiper fluid, your oil, for instance. You are thinking about those every so often, but you're not thinking about them as frequently as you are your gas in your car, which you're thinking about on a more regular basis. So when it comes to fertilization, nitrogen is the gas that's fueling the um, the plant growth in your landscape. And then irrigation. Generally, irrigation needs for warm season grasses aren't going to pop up until about April or May, depending on the year. If you look at historic trends, which I believe I have some slides on that in a minute, typically really June, July, August is when we really have to think about a small amount of supplemental irrigation for warm season lawns. But historically, historic precipitation numbers don't take to account some of the variation that happens year to year. And so as a result, there will be some years where as early as April or May, we may need some irrigation depending on how dry it's been. And we will talk through a lot of those things here. So right now, water needs of Bermuda grass, if we look at the months of February, March, and April, um, using 30-year historic data that we have from the mesonet, and what we know to be true about Bermuda grass water needs. So we know that the average Bermuda grass water need is going to be 1.5 inches in the month of February at our central Oklahoma mesonet location that we took this data from. So we pulled it from the Spencer site, which is the closest one to our office. The average precipitation at that site is 1.6 inches for the month of February. So what we find is that we have a surplus of about a tenth of an inch of moisture for the month of February. So year over year, we end up being on average above what we need to maintain Bermuda grass water needs in the root zone for the month of February. If you can, question from the audience? So the question on aeration was, should you do core or plug aeration, or should you do tine or spike aeration? And really, it's up to you. The core aeration is going to be more destructive, so you're going to have in the short term more harsh results on your turf grass, but you're going to get um, more cores taken out and more voids that can be filled up with compost or sand or other materials. And so it really will depend on um, how aggressive you want to be, how compacted your site is. A small tine aerator is usually effective enough. You can do core aeration if it's a really tough situation. Actually, I should have mentioned this, but one of my favorite things is what I call the poor man's aeration, and I just take a cordless drill with a really fat bit, and I just walk around the yard and poke holes in the yard, and you can then take those holes that you've made in the yard with that drill bit and rub compost in, rake compost in, and I do that in place of any form of actual hiring out of professional aeration. Um, and so you can use, I wouldn't use an auger bit because that's going to do too much, but a small auger or like a masonry bit would be fine. So good question. So what I show you this to just show you that if you look at this calendar, July and August, based on the historic data that we have, are really the 2 months when you need to think about supplemental irrigation for warm season grasses. And so don't get into this habit of, as soon as we start getting nice days in March, April, and May, um, thinking that you need to kick on your home irrigation systems or put out your hose in lawn sprinkler and start watering. It's really just not, it's not the case, especially when it comes to warm season grasses. And so we're talking specifically about turf grasses here. July and August, when we really get hot, warm days, we get periods of dry 2 to 3 week spells with no moisture. That's really when we may want to have some supplemental irrigation so that we maintain our lawns at optimal quality. When we look at some of the early spring warm season lawn care, weed control and insect control things, again, refer to that fact sheet. L442 is the number. It's Bermuda Grass Lawn Management Calendar. There's two ways that we control weeds in any lawn. It's in the form of pre-emergent control or post-emergent control. And pre-emergent control is simply trying to beat the weeds before they show up. That's that pre. Um, and so we want to think about when weeds are going to start to germinate and start to grow, and we want to apply that product in a window of time shortly before that, so that it can start to work its way into the top few inches of that soil root zone, and begin to provide that chemical um, control that it does. And so pre-emergent products, um, here are some of the products that are suggested. Orzolan plus Benfen are the chemical names, but you'll see it under things like green light amaze, gallery, portrait, isoxaben. Any of those products that you see right now in the garden centers that are pre-emergent products will work. What you need to pay attention to and remember, though, is that you need to flip over the back of that label and make sure that it is listed to control the weeds you're trying to control. Um, the other thing I will mention in when we're talking about warm season control is a lot of times those crabgrass weed and feed products are very popular because they give you the 2-in-1 benefit of fertilizing lawn while also controlling weeds. And those are great products, but when you apply them really early, what I find is you have to think about soil temperatures and about when the weeds you're trying to prevent are going to be germinating. So for instance, crabgrass very seldomly will germinate in February, March. It's a summer annual grassy weed. And so when you think about that, your later applications of a weed and feed product are going to be more effective than if you tried to apply weed and feed now through even into mid April. I would hold off on weed and feed products until a little bit later, because what you end up doing is that pre-emergent product that's in that weed and feed product is just wasted, and then the nutrients that are there end up feeding the weeds that are already germinated, the cooler season lawn weeds that are already there, maybe have germinated. They grow and grow lush and big, things like henbit, dandelions, things like that, because you fed them, but you aren't providing that control on the grassy weeds that you wanted. And so just think about that. Think about timing and the importance of that. In general, though, February through mid March is a great time for a first application of pre emergent weed control, especially for broadleaf products. And so, if you're trying to control broadleaf weeds, winter weeds, things like uh, henbit, um, things of that nature, then you can use products in February and early March. What you'll find is that pre-emergent products have a short window of time that they're effective. It can be as little as 40 or 50 days as to as much as 100 days. And a lot of that has to do with the product you're using, but mainly it has to do with the environmental conditions. How much rainfall have we had? What have temperatures been? How quickly are they breaking down in the soil or moving down into deeper depths of the soil profile? And so um, if you have already applied a pre-emergent application, say in early February, or late January. Some even do it then. You may find that with as much snow melt as we're going to have, if we get any more rainfall, that window of time for efficacy for your pre-emergence will be shortened, and so you may have to depend on a second application, say in April or early May, to give you the control you want extending into the growing season. Post-emergent control is used to treat or to eradicate weeds after they've already emerged. And so you can on dormant lawns, you can use a glyphosate product, which or other non-selective weed control products before March 1st is what we recommend, because you start to have green up typically after that. But before March 1st, you can apply those in the form of spot treatment over the lawn to control weeds. Better yet, a product, a selective product like 2,4-D dicamba mixture, broadleaf weed killing products are going to be better because they won't harm the turf grass, and they will selectively control broadleaf weeds, things like henbit and other things that are in your lawn. And so just get familiar with how to use these. And certainly there's more to weed control than we can possibly cover today. But if you have questions, you can always call me. We have lots of great resources. As I'll mention at the end of my presentation today, we have lots of video resources as well in the form of our YouTube channels, which will give you some information on these. And so don't get discouraged. Feel free to reach out to us for help anytime, and we will help you understand this better. Insect control, you can start to think about insect control starting in, say, April. Typically, late April, early May is when we start to apply preventative products for those grubs in our lawn. Um, I would only encourage you to apply grub controls in April and May as a preventative if you have had a historic problem. If you don't typically have a big grub issue, or you haven't had a grub issue in the past, um, I would hesitate to recommend for you to apply it, because I just don't think that it's kind of that IPM perspective of using products when you have to, but not just using them because you want to. And so I would hold off if you don't have a historic issue until like August, and you can do what's called a curative control. If you have grubs that have started to emerge and they've started to show up in your lawn, you can do a curative control or a second application that kills existing grubs in August. The preventative controls are going to prevent grubs from hatching out and being produced. Um, Grub control, that's a good question. I don't know. I don't believe that grub control um, will kill earthworms, specifically these preventative products. They shouldn't kill existing earthworms. There is some potential. I don't know enough about it. The research on this, I'd have to look into it a little bit. But whether the eggs from earthworms will be prevented from hatching as a result of these products, there's a possibility of that. So certainly you take that into consideration, and that's why I would say a curative approach is always better than a preventative approach. There's no preventative for grasshoppers, unfortunately, that I'm aware of. No. There may be some professional products out there that could be used in certain ways, but from a homeowner's perspective, grasshoppers are just troublesome for sure. And you do some things to prevent them from decimating your crops. There are some sprays and things which I could share with you at another time, but in general, no, there aren't good preventative options for grasshoppers, unfortunately. A little pro tip I'd like to share with you. Julia kind of mentioned this, but this is always I always refer to this as Ray's weed control tip. Ray was the um, educator here before me and before Julia, who was here over 30 years, and he passed away a couple of years ago. And so our call center is named in his honor. We have a little memorial garden here for him, and he was just a wealth of knowledge. And his pro tip was once you start seeing forsythia blooming out in the landscapes, that's when you need to get your pre-emergent products down. And the reason for that is it's about soil temperatures. And when the soil temperatures, the outdoor temperatures are right for forsythia to start blooming this nice yellow, that's when weeds, especially the summer weeds, will start to emerge in the form of germinating seeds. And so get those pre-emergent products down once you see the forsythia blooming. Of course, other things to be doing right now, prepare your mowers and things for spring once it's warm enough and nice enough to get out there. I would say just enjoy being indoors right now. But once the snow melts and we get back to some normalcy in terms of weather, get out there and clean your filters, change your oil, do other maintenance for your lawns. Um, you probably won't have to do any warm season mowing if you're lucky until at least late April, sometimes late May. It'll depend on your fertilization. If you do some early season fertilization, you may have to do some April mowing because you'll have some vegetative growth going on. But typically, I would say May is when you start mowing warm season grasses regularly. Cool season grasses, however, if you've got a tall fescue lawn, probably very soon as we start to have some warm up. Um, as early as March on existing um, tall fescue areas, you may have to do some mowing in order to keep it neat and nice. Um, if you are establishing a warm season lawn this spring or you're thinking about it, of course, there are a bunch of options and ways for you to do that. There's sprigging, plugging, sodding. Always start with a soil test before you establish a new lawn or landscape site. It's really a best practice, and this will help you determine a fertility regime. It'll help you determine if there's any pH imbalance issues, what can be done to give you the best leg up for success. When it comes to seeding or sodding warm season grasses, the best time to do that is going to be your late spring and early summer months. So we're talking really early May into late June and early July is going to be your best time for success with warm season sod. Now, that being said, I have seen people take dormant Bermuda grass sod that is just as yellow, gold as can be, and lay it down in November and December, and in the form of more erosion control situations on new built homes or roadside projects, and eventually it will establish itself. But the best opportunity for success is going to be for establishing in the late spring and early summer. Cool season grasses, really, there's two best times, as Julia mentioned. Early fall is the best time, but early spring is another good time to do that. I'd say it's a second best option, and so typically say mid-February if the conditions are right. Right now, obviously, you're not going to be doing any sort of lawn seeding right now because um, it'll just be bird seed. But once we get some of this snow melting back, really mid-February through the end of March are good times to establish cool season lawns. You may see some diseases, some issues that crop up from time to time. Some of the common ones, spring dead spot is a common fungal disease that occurs in Bermuda grass, and it primarily is going to occur in highly managed lawns that are regularly fertilized, regularly mowed, and you'll see it form basically these little dieback areas um, that are that fungal pathogen just consuming um, the turf grass and killing it back. If you have a lawn that's not fertilized regularly, not irrigated regularly, um, then you're not very likely to have this. But um, that you can approach this with some herbicide treatments, but they're really, really not very effective, and you typically have to time them in the season before, so a fall application would be ideal for trying to prevent this from happening in the spring. Once you see the symptoms, there's not much you can do other than um, just letting it run its course. And typically, once we get into the main growing season, it'll start to even out, and you'll see your lawn kind of fill out green again. And so um, that's really the best treatment. There are fungicides, um, again, like I said, but um, they're expensive, and their effectiveness is sometimes minimal. When we talk about cool season lawns, the same thing. We've got this calendar, cool season lawn management calendar. Please go check it out. It's going to give you all the month-to-month tips that I talked about with warm season grass. Things that you'll be thinking about right now, like we've discussed, establishing and overseeding mid-February through mid to late March. Fertilization on cool season grasses, we may be considering some fertilization in late March or early April. And again, based on a soil test, typically if you're doing 3 to 4 applications a year, you would time them in March, May, and October for cool season grasses. Whereas our warm season grasses, we won't start our fertilization probably until May, or you shouldn't anyway. Irrigation, typically you're going to need about 1 inch a week during the growing season. So once we get into March and April, you may have some irrigation need for tall fescue. And so that's why tall fescue really it's although it's a beautiful option from a water use perspective, from an input perspective, it's not as great of an option. Certainly has a great ability to work in shady areas where warm season turf grasses don't. Um, I like to see I tend to encourage people to try zoysia or a warm season grass that can tolerate a bit more shade, or do some structural pruning on trees and things so that you get more light in there ahead of just jumping to tall fescue. But uh, I that being said, tall fescue is beautiful and it has a place in landscapes. And so if you look at the months of February, March, and April, kind of the spring months that we're talking about, there may be as much as 1/2 inch to 1 inch of additional irrigation need above the rainfall that we get in order to maintain your tall fescue optimally. Weed control, again, the same weed control principles that apply for warm season grass will apply for cool season grass. There's pre-emergent weed control, post-emergent weed control. The only differences is that you have to think about pre-emergent timing if you're going to be doing any sort of overseeding of cool season lawn. So if you plan to put down some tall fescue seed in your lawn to overseed and get more tall fescue growing under trees and things like that, you want to hold off on any sort of pre-emergent weed control application in those areas for at least as long as it takes to get your tall fescue germinated and up to a couple inches in height, so that it's safe. Otherwise, you'll limit or even completely reduce your tall fescue's ability to germinate and establish there. So that's a common mistake people make. The other thing is non-selective post-emergent products will kill any plants that are green and actively growing. They can kill. And so don't use a glyphosate or non-selective herbicide product on cool season grass when it's green. Really anytime at all, because in Oklahoma, your odds of it being green and actively growing throughout the year are pretty good. And so don't apply post-emergent products on cool season lawn areas. Use a broadleaf product that is just going to kill the broadleaf weeds, things like weed begone, trimec, things like that. So just keep that in mind. Same thing is true for the insect control. Uh, April, May for preventative products. Curative products would be later in the summer, early fall. Do we have a question? No. Okay. Um, just a quick tip. If you are an Oklahoma City customer, if you plan to do any overseeding or establishing of new turf, if you're going to put in a new landscape, you're going to put in a brand new lawn, you are subject to the odd even watering rules that the city of Oklahoma City has in place. And so I encourage you to go to okc.gov and go to the water utilities website. You can get a variance with the city of Oklahoma City to water every day or for a period of days in order to water in and establish new plants, whether it be a tree or lawn, new landscape areas, so that you aren't at risk of um, breaking the rules, getting your neighbor tattling on you, or just just so you're in compliance with the city ordinances. And so, encourage you to do that. If you choose to do that, the form is on the website. It may not look like this anymore, but this is what it used to look like. You fill that out, and they will reach out to you to let you know if your variance was approved. Um, I mentioned some soil testing, so we're going to jump right into that.